You arrive in Rome at the hour when the light is still warm enough to flatter stone. For a moment, the city gives you exactly what memory and imagination have always promised. Marble catches the last gold of the afternoon. Columns stand as though they were designed not simply to hold weight, but to convince the human heart that order is possible. The air is touched with wood smoke, olive oil, bread, sweat, and the salt of distant trade. Somewhere a mule complains. Somewhere a wheel rattles over worn stone. Voices rise and fall in a language that seems stern and musical at once. And all around you, people move with the brisk, practical confidence of those who belong to a city that assumes it will outlast them. At first it is easy to understand why Rome filled so many minds long after its emperors and magistrates were gone. Even now, standing among the noise and dust, you can feel the pull of its self-belief. This is a city that thinks in public. It builds in public. It judges in public. It remembers itself in public. The avenues widen toward important buildings with a certainty that feels almost moral. The very paving stones seem to imply that every footstep should know where it belongs. And yet, after only a few moments, something else begins to emerge beneath the grandeur. It is not a single thing. It is a pressure, a quickness in the way people make room when an official passes, a silence that falls too neatly around certain gestures. The rods carried before a magistrate are not ornamental. The glances cast toward them are not ceremonial. The city is magnificent. Yes, but part of that magnificence is maintained by a knowledge shared almost instinctively among the people who live here. Rome does not merely ask to be obeyed. Rome expects obedience to be visible. If this kind of slow wandering through the darker rooms of history helps your mind grow quieter, you might stay close to it tonight in the same way you would stay close to a steady fire on a cold evening, not because it demands anything from you, but because its constancy is strangely comforting. For now, though, there is no need to decide anything, no need to judge too quickly, no need to carry the whole empire in your head all at once. We are not here to cheer for cruelty or to stare too hard at suffering until it loses shape. We are here to understand how a city of law taught itself to feel safe through fear, and how punishment in Rome became something more than correction. It became language, it became architecture, it became memory. So let the streets gather around you first. Listen to the uneven percussion of sandals over stone. Listen to merchants calling out fruit, oil, cloth, and fish. Listen to the little break in the crowd's rhythm whenever authority approaches. A donkey brays somewhere behind, a cart loaded with amphorae. Two boys run laughing until an older voice cuts sharply across the lane and sends them back into line. Above all this movement, the first lamps are being prepared. There is a pause in the light now, a brief and beautiful uncertainty, when the sky has not yet committed to dusk, and every wall seems to carry a softer edge. This is the hour when a city reveals what it has been all day. Rome, at this hour, reveals that law is not tucked away in scrolls or hidden inside the minds of scholars. It is moving through the forum, standing on the steps of temples, waiting near the courts, riding in the posture of officials, and living in the caution of ordinary people. Still, the city breathes around all of it. Bread is sold. Water is carried. Friends meet and argue. Slaves hurry on errands. Old men pause beneath porticos and watch the younger ones hurry by. Dogs sleep where they can. A little dust rises whenever cartwheels pass over patches that are more earth than paving. Nothing about the place says that all conversation has stopped for fear of punishment. That is not how power works in a city like this. Power is strongest not when life halts, but when life continues around it, as though it were weather. And that is why we can look into these shadows without staying trapped in them. We are only following one slow path through one Roman evening of thought. We are not standing before every execution. We are not reliving every blow. We are not here to turn punishment into a gallery of shocks. What matters more is the shape behind the examples, the Roman habit of making law legible to the senses, making fear visible to the eye, memorable to the ear, and almost tangible to the body. If you hold that thought gently, the city becomes easier to understand. Before the sack and the cross, before the arena sand and the cliff edge, there were the laws themselves. Not perfect, not humane by modern standards, not even consistent across centuries, but clear in a way the Romans admired. The old tradition of the 12 tables lingered in the Roman imagination, not simply because it was ancient, but because it represented something nearly sacred to Roman political thought, a rule written down where people could see it. A harsh law known to all was better in this way of thinking than a softer law hidden in the discretion of the powerful. You can imagine those bronze tablets in the forum, sunlight flashing off the surface, citizens and clients and litigants brushing past them, knowing that the city had chosen to make its rules public. That gesture matters. It means that punishment begins not as an accident or a private act of revenge, but as something deliberately exposed. The state wants you to see it coming. The state wants you to know where the line is. The state wants the line to feel hard. And in Rome, that hardness did not stop with words. It passed into symbols. The magistrates' lictors carried bundles of rods and an axe, not because subtlety was a Roman preference, but because authority was meant to travel with a visible edge. Even before a sentence was spoken, the body could feel what the state intended. The rods meant correction, the axe meant finality, the symbols spared no one the trouble of guessing. There is something almost restful in that clarity, if you stand far enough from it. Harsh, yes, but orderly, terrible, yes, but not chaotic. Rome preferred consequences that could be recognized at a glance. That, perhaps, is one reason Roman punishments remained so memorable. They did not hide their meaning, they announced it. The forum around you, then, is not just a market or political square. It is a theatre of consequences, trials, accusations, denunciations, petitions, bargains, witnesses, and verdicts, all move through the same space, where fruit is sold and speeches are made. Public life and public justice interlace. A crowd can gather for commerce and remain for condemnation. The same square that hears applause can hear a sentence. The same stones that support a magistrate's dignity can support a criminal's humiliation. And the crowd matters. Rome wanted it to matter. Punishment was not only for the condemned, it was also for those standing nearby, listening, learning, storing images away. The state did not merely ask the guilty to suffer, it asked the innocent to watch and remember. That is the deeper rhythm we will follow tonight, not one punishment after another, as though we were turning over curiosities in a cabinet, but one city teaching itself how to fear disorder in many different ways. And now that the light is lower, and the streets have softened into evening, the first of those ways begins to take shape. There are Roman punishments that feel almost procedural, stern and practical and heavily bound to the machinery of office. And then there are punishments that seem to arrive from a darker place in the Roman imagination, a place where crime is not simply broken order, but contamination, where the offender is not merely guilty, but somehow unnatural. The punishment of the sack belongs to that second world. You do not encounter it in the full heat of noon. It feels more suited to a dimmer edge of the city, near water, where voice is lower and everyone present understands that what is about to happen belongs to a special category of dread. The condemned person has committed what Romans considered among the most terrible of crimes, the destruction of a father or another sacred kinship relation, an offence so profound that ordinary death seems to Roman eyes almost too clean for it. That is what makes the scene feel so strange. Nothing about it is casual. Everything is loaded with the careful symbolism Romans loved whenever they were most afraid. The sack is prepared, the river waits, the condemned is separated from ordinary burial and ordinary execution alike. This person will not die simply as a criminal. He will die as something that has fallen outside the expected order of human belonging. The animals placed inside the sack make the whole thing feel half legal, half mythic, as if the city is trying to say that such a crime has made language itself insufficient, and only ritual grotesquerie can express the wound. You do not need to imagine every detail too sharply. In fact, it is better not to. What matters is the Roman logic beneath it. A crime against the family head was a crime against a miniature version of the state. Household authority and civic authority mirrored one another. To destroy one was, in Roman thought, to threaten the pattern that held the other together. So the punishment becomes symbolic expulsion. The condemned is enclosed, accompanied by creatures chosen not for practical necessity, but for moral meaning, and surrendered to water as though the city were returning an unrecognizable thing to a world outside itself. There is no ordinary funeral here, no dignified body carried home, no orderly re-entry into ancestral memory. The sack denies all of that, and when it disappears beneath the surface, what lingers is less the physical event than the Roman message. Some crimes make you unfit for ordinary human endings. This is the first important shift in the city's penal imagination. Punishment is no longer only about pain, it is about classification. Rome is declaring what kind of being you have become by acting against the order it worships. The river closes, the crowd disperses slowly. Water returns to the business of looking indifferent. A few men murmur to one another. Somewhere behind you, a cart creaks back toward the main road. Above, lamps are burning brighter now, and the city, as cities do, continues. It always continues, that continuity matters, because it reminds you that even the most bizarre punishment in Rome was still part of ordinary civic life. People watched, then they went home. Bread still had to be bought. Accounts still had to be kept. Mothers still called children in from the street. Rome folded even its strangest terrors into routine. And perhaps that is why the next punishment feels in some ways simpler, and in other ways more horrifying. A sack vanishes quickly from sight. A cross does not. You leave the river and move toward the open roads and raised places where visibility matters. Here, the Roman instinct for public instruction is harder, clearer, and much less symbolic. Crucifixion does not require allegory, it requires time. The figure on the cross does not belong to Rome in the same way a citizen magistrate does. That distinction is essential. This is punishment sorted by rank. Rome was never shy about declaring that status changed what kind of death you were thought to deserve. For the high-born, there might be swifter endings, cleaner endings, endings that still acknowledged some residual dignity. For slaves, rebels, pirates, the conquered, or those placed beyond the protection of Roman standing, the cross stood ready as a more public answer. What the cross says is very plain. The state can turn your body into a message and leave the message standing long after the sentence is spoken. Everything about crucifixion intensifies visibility. The slow approach, the exposed body, the placement along roadsides, or in places where the city cannot help but absorb the sight. The length of the dying, the refusal of privacy, the humiliation is not an accessory to the punishment. It is part of the punishment's central grammar. In this way, crucifixion reveals something Rome understood better than many modern societies are willing to admit. Fear teaches best when it can be revisited. A fast death ends too quickly. A prolonged one lingers in collective memory. People pass, they look away, they look back. Children ask questions. Travelers carry the image onward. The punishment multiplies itself through repetition. But even here, in this most iconic of Roman cruelties, there is a strange stillness if you watch the scene from a great enough distance. The road remains a road. Dust rises, light changes, birds circle. The condemned body, terrible as it is, becomes part of the horizon. And that may be the darkest truth of all. Rome trusted not only terror but habituation. It trusted that people would learn to keep walking. By the time the sky has gone from gold to violet, even this long public lesson begins to look less like an event and more like an element of the city's weather. Then there is the arena, where weather becomes entertainment. If the cross teaches through endurance, the arena teaches through appetite. Here punishment and spectacle are stitched so tightly together that it becomes difficult to separate the legal sentence from the crowd's hunger. The sand has its own smell in the evening, after a day of blood and trampling feet. What? The seats are still warm from bodies. The gates and mechanisms behind the walls remind you that this place runs on planning as much as cruelty. Nothing is accidental, not the timing, not the sequence, not the exposure, not the use of beasts, not the crowd's expectation that the condemned should help fill the day. This is what makes damnation to beasts so revealing. It is not just an execution, it is a classification of a life as disposable enough to be consumed in public and useful enough to animate a crowd while dying. The animal matters, of course, the raw matters, the crowd's reaction matters, but more than any individual element, what matters is the setting. The Roman arena is an engine for turning death into civic experience. It allows the crowd to practice power from a safe height, while the condemned practices helplessness below. And yet, even in the arena, Rome prefers form to chaos. Handlers move, sand is raked, bodies are removed. The machinery of spectacle continues with the efficiency of a kitchen or a barracks. One event follows another, not because the Romans lacked imagination, but because their imagination was deeply administrative. They could routinize nearly anything. That administrative quality is why the arena remains, for all its blood, part of the same Roman world as the forum and the court. Law and entertainment are not opposites here. They are neighbouring expressions of the same confidence that the state may use human beings as examples. When the final shouts begin to fade, what remains is the image of a crowd learning once again which bodies count less than its amusement. And then, after all that sound, comes the remarkable quiet that falls over an empty arena after dark. No cheers, no handlers, no chains dragged over the sand, just the smell left behind, the cooling stone, and a space that seems incapable of explaining itself now that the audience has gone. That is one of the things history does best. It leaves us alone with places after their noise has ended. The silence itself becomes part of the lesson. You stand in that silence for a little while. It is needed. The body can only hold so much fear before it must be brought back to stone, air, water, and distance. So let the arena rest. Let the crowd thin. Let torchlight settle into a smaller world. Because Rome did not only punish through giant public spectacles. Sometimes it staged death more carefully. Sometimes it stretched the condemned person between hope and inevitability, giving a sword without giving a future. That is the logic of those condemned to the arena's schools, to forced combat rather than instant slaughter. Here, the condemned is not simply handed to an animal. He is instructed, equipped, and displayed through a fiction of agency. It is a cruel refinement, a managed chance, a rehearsal of survival with almost no true exit. The Roman crowd loved categories, but it also loved gradations. A person can be thrown to beasts, or made to fight other doomed people for the crowd's pleasure. In the second case, the state gets more time, more drama, more noise, more gesture. The condemned gets a weapon, and therefore, in appearance, a little dignity. But the dignity is unstable, it belongs to the show. The result is a punishment that feels almost modern in its cynicism. It offers the condemned the shape of self-determination, while keeping the substance of doom. This too is part of Rome's civic language. Punishment need not always be immediate to be final. It can be theatrical, extended, and still relentlessly closed at the end. Once you understand that, the smaller punishments begin to look different as well. Take retaliation. The law of mirrored injury has nothing of the arena's scale, and none of the cross's public duration. It feels closer, sharper, almost domestic in its severity. To answer injury with injury, under law, is to place the body itself at the centre of balance. Rome is saying not simply that harm deserves response, but that the body can be made to speak equivalence. There is something archaic and oddly intimate here. No exotic beasts, no elaborate apparatus, just the belief that flesh can measure justice. If you stand too near that idea, it becomes difficult to breathe comfortably around it. So stand farther back. See the principle rather than the wound. What Rome wanted was not merely symmetry, but containment. Retaliation marked the edge beyond which vengeance should not pass. It was brutal, yes, but it also reflects a society trying to prevent endless feuds by pinning violence to a rule. That is the Roman pattern again. Horror arranged, fear measured, pain translated into public meaning, and after so many punishments aimed at the body, it becomes almost a relief to remember that Rome could destroy a person without blood at all. To exile a Roman was not simply to change his address. That is the first thing the road teaches you as you follow the figure leaving the city. A man may still have his limbs, his breath, the ability to walk, think, eat and sleep, yet the city can already be peeling away from him like a former skin. This is what exile does in a world where belonging is civic before it is personal. It takes the roads you know, the clients who greet you, the family tombs, the forums in which your name means something, the laws that once protected you, the ordinary confidence of moving through streets as though they recognize you, and it makes them all recede at once. Rome understood perfectly well that to remove someone from the city was to unmake much more than geography. Perhaps that is why exile feels quieter and sadder than the punishments of the body. There is no crowd in full cry, no scaffold at the centre of attention, no theatrical instant. Instead, there is road dust distance, a ship on dark water, a letter that will arrive too late or not at all, the awkward charity of foreigners, the humiliation of discovering that the world continues perfectly well without your old importance in it. In some ways it is a slower punishment, because it requires the condemned person to keep living inside the damage. For the elite in particular, exile could be a kind of civic death. Property might be seized, citizenship might weaken or vanish. Family ties become strained by fear, law, or embarrassment. A man who once spoke with confidence in the forum might now speak his own name in a smaller room and hear that it has gone light. Almost unreal. The Romans were unusually sensitive to this kind of loss. because Roman identity was not merely private. It was participatory. To be Roman was to be held inside a web of visible relations. Remove the web, and you leave the person suspended in an emptiness that even a comfortable villa abroad cannot fully disguise. This is the softer but more pervasive side of Roman punishment. Not the destruction of the body, but the unmaking of relevance. And from exile, it is only a short step to shame. You do not have to leave the city to be made smaller inside it. The Forum can do that well enough. Public humiliation in Rome worked because honor was social before it was psychological. A person did not simply feel shame privately and then recover by inward reflection. Shame lived in the eyes of others, in the memory of onlookers, in the repeated telling of an incident, in the way neighbours or colleagues adjusted their greetings, in the changed weight of your name when spoken aloud. This made public rituals of disgrace particularly efficient. They cost the state little. The crowd did much of the work. A debtor made visible in his ruin, a thief marked and paraded, a body bent under a yoke, a liar named where all can hear, a branded flesh that will announce the past to every future glance. These things did more than punish a single event. They poisoned time itself. They ensured that the offence would continue to arrive before the person did. The Romans understood that ridicule can outlast pain. There is something strangely intimate about a crowd's contempt. It leaves no wound that can be bandaged, no scar that can be hidden beneath cloth. Instead, it spreads through rumour, through posture, through the slight turning of faces away from yours when you enter a room. Rome, for all its love of grandeur, was built out of these small social recognitions. To fall in them was to find yourself walking through familiar streets as though they no longer belonged to your feet. If shame attacks the public face, slavery as punishment attacks the legal soul. The clink of chains is one of those sounds that reaches backward through time, with hardly any translation needed. It is enough by itself, but in Rome it carried meanings that were especially grave, because the law was so explicit about what enslavement could mean. A person could be turned into property, a life could be reclassified, labour, obedience, bodily availability, sale, movement, even testimony could be determined not by personhood but by ownership. This was not metaphor, it was administrative fact. When slavery followed crime or debt or sentence, the punishment did not simply add labour to life. It subtracted personhood from it. Mines, public works, chain gangs, the sale block, all these belonged to Rome's ability to convert guilt into usefulness. If the body was still breathing, it could still be employed. If it could still be employed, then the state or a master could still extract value. That cold efficiency explains much of Roman punishment. The city disliked waste, unless waste itself was part of the spectacle. Otherwise, a condemned life might still be made to serve. You can feel the difference between this punishment and the others. The arena ends, the cliff ends, exile changes shape over time, but penal enslavement grinds. It lasts. It makes each day resemble the one before it, until a person's memory of freedom grows thin at the edges. The Roman city above, with all its rhetoric about law, glory, and civilization, is sustained in part by this quieter underworld of compelled labour. That is why the sound of chains says more about Roman order than many speeches ever did. And yet, even here, Rome could still punish without chains, without blood, without public handling of a body at all. It could reach for wealth, for standing, for legal capacity, for reputation. In some moods, the Roman state seems almost to prefer these quieter tools because they penetrate a life without requiring the inconvenience of a scaffold. Financial punishment has none of the arena's spectacle, but it has its own cold magnificence. Inventory lists, assessments, caesures, accounts transferred from one hand to another, estates folded into the treasury, a household learning that tables, lamps, land, animals, slaves, wall hangings and ledgers no longer belong to it. All of this can destroy a family with the decorum of a clerk. And decorum is part of the terror. Nothing appears disordered. The ruin arrives by record. This makes confiscation one of Rome's most elegant cruelties. When wealth is removed in this world, influence goes with it. A family without its property does not simply lose comfort. It loses the architecture of its future. Daughters marry differently. Clients drift elsewhere. Political doors close. The house itself feels altered, as though furniture and walls have understood something before the people do. A confiscated estate is not only a punishment, it is a rearrangement of social gravity. And if confiscation attacks substance, infamy attacks the right to stand among others as before. Infamia is one of those Roman ideas that seems at first almost abstract, until you imagine living under it. You are present, but your credibility is diminished. You are visible, but your standing has thinned. Certain roles close to you, certain legal acts lose force in your hands. Occupations, scandals, convictions, and public disgrace can follow you like a shadow that others are obliged to recognize. In that way, infamy feels less like a moment and more like weather, persistent and quietly invasive. Rome was unusually gifted at turning status into law and law back into status. Infamy shows that process at work with chilly precision. The stain is social, but it is also structured. It lives in opinion, yet also in formal consequence. A person marked this way discovers that exclusion can be as organized as citizenship. It is worth pausing here. The body can only hold so much fear, and the mind can only absorb so much narrowing of a life before it needs a simpler image to rest against. So look up from the documents, the chains, the shame, the roads out of town. Look instead at the city itself. The evening is deeper now. Stone cools, the forum thins. Somewhere a door closes. Somewhere a woman lifts a lamp and passes behind a lattice. The river keeps moving, with the same unhurried indifference it showed when the sack disappeared into it. Rome's punishments were many, but the city around them remained maddeningly ordinary. That ordinary life is what makes the next cluster of fears so revealing. For some punishments, ordinary civic order was not enough as an explanation. Rome had to reach upward, toward the sacred, or inward, toward the discipline of the army, or outward, toward fire itself. The punishment of a vestal accused of impurity belongs to one of the strangest corners of Roman thought, because it is at once legal, religious, and theatrical, while trying very hard not to appear theatrical. No roaring crowd defines it. No beast, no sword, no obvious blood. Instead, there is solemnity, procession, silence, and the careful moral awkwardness of a city that believes a sacred woman must be removed without technically having her sacred blood spilled. That evasiveness tells you almost everything. Rome, for all its appetite for punishment, still feared certain boundaries. A vestal was sacred. To kill her plainly would acknowledge one sort of power. To bury her alive in a furnished underground chamber acknowledged another. The city wanted to deny responsibility while exercising it completely. It wanted purification without admitting open sacrilege. So the ritual becomes one of those moments when Roman religion and Roman law stop pretending they are separate. The underground chamber, the little provisions, the sealed space, all of it creates an atmosphere heavier than the arena's noise. Silence can be more terrible than shouting when it signals that an entire city believes divine order depends on this one suffocating solution. That is the Roman fear of pollution, not merely wrongdoing, but contamination, not merely guilt, but danger spreading from one soul to a whole civic body. The army, too, feared contagion of a different kind. Cowardice, mutiny, collapse of nerve. These were not treated as individual moods alone, but as diseases of the unit. Decimation is unforgettable, because it reveals just how deeply the Roman military understood terror as a method of repair. If 1 in 10 must die at the hands of the other 9, then the legion itself becomes the instrument of its own correction. Authority does not descend only from above. It circulates through comradeship and guilt. There is no need to dwell on the blows. What matters is the design. Random lot, collective execution, shared survival afterward. It is a punishment not merely for those who die, but for those who remain. It teaches every soldier that his fate can be tied to the failures of others, and that discipline is therefore a communal burden, not a private virtue. Rome liked punishments that travelled outward from the condemned into the minds of spectators. Decimation travels inward as well, seeding dread within the very body it aims to strengthen. The legion emerges from it not only thinned, but bound more tightly to fear. And then there is fire. Fire is one of the oldest Roman companions. Hearths, lamps, sacrifice, metalwork, cook fires, public flame, the eternal fire of Vesta itself. Perhaps that is why burning as punishment feels so symbolically overdetermined. It is not only pain, it is accusation, cleansing, annihilation, and warning all at once. The pyre, the living torch, the body consumed in open view, these belong to a Roman habit of making punishment resemble moral chemistry. Some offences are treated as though they must be broken apart into smoke and ash before the city can feel secure again. To burn a body is to refuse its future in a very total way. There is little left to bury, little left to display, little left for memory, but the event itself. That too is Roman. If punishment has failed to silence a life while it lived, perhaps it can at least simplify that life after death into a single unforgettable image. But even fire cools, even the most violent flame ends as ash, soft enough to move in the slightest wind. That transformation matters because it leads into the last Roman obsession we must visit tonight. The obsession not with ending lives, but with controlling what remains of them. Memory. If Rome feared disorder in the body and disorder in the state, it also feared disorder in history. The punishment of memory, the chiseling away of names, the smashing or reworking of statues. The blank spaces on inscriptions, the recalled images, the altered coinage, all reveal a culture that understood how dangerous remembrance could be. To leave a name intact was to concede a future to it. To erase it was to attempt rule over posterity itself. Damnatio memoria is one of Rome's most eloquent forms of insecurity. Only a culture very serious about fame, ancestry, office, and public image would devise such an answer. It is not enough to defeat the disgraced person, execute him, exile him, confiscate him, shame him. He must also be stripped from the surfaces where later eyes might meet him. His name becomes a hole, his likeness becomes a problem to be reckoned, and of course the failure is built into the attempt. Blankness is memorable. Chiseled absence invites curiosity. The act of erasure often becomes the very thing that preserves the lost figure in later minds. In that sense, Rome's punishment of memory is almost tender in its futility. Power reaches for permanence and discovers that even ruins gossip. From condemned memory, it is only a small step to punishing the dead directly. This too is revealing. To drag a corpse, to deny burial, to try the dead, to confiscate after death, to expose remains, to let a body be seen in disgrace, even after life has ended. These acts only make sense in a world where death has not sealed meaning shut. For Rome, burial mattered, family rights mattered, the resting of bodies in proper relation to memory and the underworld mattered. To refuse that rest was therefore a real extension of punishment, not a hollow gesture. The dead could still be used to instruct the living. You feel this especially near places where the city's geography and its punishments meet. The Tarpeian Rock is one such place, a cliff edge, a drop, a public descent from sacred height into disgrace. It is almost too perfect as political theatre. Treason rises toward the centre of the city's holiness, only to be hurled back out of it. The symbolism is blunt enough to satisfy Rome's taste for clarity. The body falls, the city rejects. The spectators learn Rome loved a punishment that could be explained in a single image. And yet, the stones, once the body is gone, keep the scene more quietly than the law does. That is one reason it helps, at this late hour, to think less about the falling itself, and more about the places that absorb these acts. Forum, arena, riverbank, road, military camp, temple precinct, cliff edge. Roman justice lives not just in texts but in sites. Its geography is part of its memory. By now, the city around you is almost entirely night. That is the right moment to consider the punishments connected to what cannot be seen clearly at all. Sorcery, poison, hidden malice, the unobserved threats inside the home or the body. Rome could tolerate visible violence with almost administrative calm, but hidden danger made it nervous. Poisoning, spells, private curse tablets, suspicious remedies, foreign practices, all these stirred a different kind of panic. They turned fear inward. The enemy might not be roaring in the arena or nailed by the roadside. The enemy might be seated at dinner. The enemy might be a neighbour. The enemy might be the servant pouring wine, the woman muttering over herbs, the rival consulting stars, the unseen hand behind a sudden fever. These are punishments born from paranoia as much as principle. What the trials reveal is a Rome frightened not only by open rebellion, but by what slips beneath surfaces. When the danger cannot be seen, accusation itself begins to thicken. Rumour becomes evidence's impatient cousin. Anxiety starts to do the work of proof. And once that happens, punishment becomes a way to reassure the city that the invisible has been mastered. That reassurance, like most Roman reassurances, arrives in public form. A trial, a sentence, a burning, an example. The unseen must be made visible again. Otherwise it remains too dangerous to sleep near. And perhaps that is the deepest pattern beneath everything we have walked through. Rome punished not simply to avenge or remove. Rome punished to instruct the senses, to make law seen, to make betrayal felt, to make pollution named, to make social rank tangible, to make memory manageable, to make fear useful. That is why so many Roman punishments still linger in imagination long after the empire itself broke apart. They were designed to linger, seen in crowds, tied to place, structured by ritual, thick with symbolism. They entered memory already prepared to remain there. The forum is nearly empty now. The arena, somewhere beyond the dark, holds only cooling stone. The river keeps its own council. The military camp, if you imagine it, lies under a harder discipline of sleep. Temple fires burn where they must. Houses shut their doors. Somewhere a final cart passes over paving and is gone. This is the hour when the examples begin to loosen from one another. The sack is no longer a sack, but an image of family terror. The cross is no longer a beam, but an image of displayed power. The beasts are no longer animals, but an image of disposable lives. Exile becomes distance itself. Shame becomes a public face turned inward. Slavery becomes the sound of a chain under law. Fire becomes ash. Erasure becomes blank stone. The cliff becomes the city's gesture of rejection. Poison and sorcery become the fear of what cannot be caught in daylight. One by one, they stop being events and become shadows. And the shadows, once that happens, stop asking quite so much of you. That may be the only gentle thing to be said about a subject like this. History, if given enough room, eventually releases some of its grip. Not by becoming false, and not by becoming light, but by settling into pattern. Once you understand what Rome wanted punishment to do, you no longer have to stand inside every sentence. You can stand outside the whole system and see its outline. Roman justice worked because it was seen, felt, and remembered. That is the thought worth keeping, not because it excuses anything, but because it explains why these old punishments still seem so vividly present. They were crafted to live on in telling. They belonged to a city that knew spectacle could serve order, that memory could serve power, and that people obey more readily when consequences arrive not only in law books, but in stories, places, and public images. If you linger a little longer in this Roman night, other punishments step forward from the dark, not because they are louder than the ones already seen, but because Rome rarely trusted a single method of teaching fear. Exile, for instance, can be followed farther than a single departing figure on a road. If you remain with it a while, you begin to notice that exile was one of Rome's most flexible punishments, precisely because it could be tailored to the sort of person the state wished to remove. A troublesome senator did not need to be fed to lions if his influence could be drained away by distance. A poet who had offended the wrong ruler did not need a public execution if banishment to a remote edge of the world would turn his own words into instruments of homesickness. A political rival, if sent far enough away from the centre, might become almost harmless simply by becoming peripheral. Rome was a city obsessed with centre and edge. To live near the centre was to matter. To be pushed toward the edge was to feel importance peeling off day by day. That is what makes exile one of the most humanly exhausting punishments in the Roman repertoire. It forces the condemned to continue participating in time. A man on a cross has no more appointments to keep. An exile has too many. He must wake, eat, remember, regret, write letters, wonder which friends have remained loyal, wonder whether the city has already forgotten his face, wonder which possessions are gone, which family members still speak his name, and whether the language around him will ever stop sounding like a wall. Rome knew that banishment could hollow a life out from within, and for many people of rank, that slow hollowing was more effective than a dramatic execution. A noble Roman could endure pain with stoic dignity if given the right audience. Enduring irrelevance was a much lonelier skill. From exile it is natural to return mentally to the forum, because Roman punishment often oscillated between two poles, distance and exposure. Exile casts you away, public shame pins you in place. The forum's humiliations are particularly revealing because they show Rome's trust in the crowd as a moral instrument. The state does not need to strike every blow itself, if it can arrange the conditions under which contempt becomes communal. A placard, a procession, a visible mark, a public declaration of debt or fraud, and suddenly everyone who sees you participates in punishment simply by remembering. The forum was full of eyes, and eyes could be conscripted. What is strange and rather Roman is how these rituals of shame blend theatricality with bureaucracy. They are emotionally vivid, but structurally orderly. Even disgrace has procedure, the person carrying a forked yoke through the streets, the debtor publicly exposed, the liar or thief made legible as an object lesson. All of this belongs to a city that prefers visible categories to ambiguous persons. The crowd can only shame efficiently if it has been told who the offender is and why the offender deserves to be looked at differently. That is what public ritual supplies. It transforms private failure into civic knowledge. And once that transformation occurs, the punishment continues even in silence. Doors open differently. Credit is harder to obtain. Marriage alliances weaken. Patronage thins. A man may still wear the same sandals and walk the same street. But the street has changed because everyone on it now contains a little piece of his disgrace. Rome was good at this kind of social multiplication. It knew that one event can be made to last by distributing it through memory. There is a similarly distributed quality to slavery as punishment, though it reaches deeper. To be enslaved by sentence or circumstance in the Roman world is not simply to lose freedom in the abstract. It is to discover that every ordinary action now belongs to another logic. Rising, eating, moving, speaking, resting, pairing one task with the next, all become arrangements of labour rather than expressions of will. Rome's greatness depended so heavily upon enslaved bodies that the institution always stood close to law. This closeness made penal enslavement especially chilling. Crime could be turned into utility, debt could be converted into bodily service. Defeat in war could be processed into domestic convenience, agricultural yield, or mineral extraction in mines where daylight became a rumour. If you think for a moment of the mines, the sound changes. We leave the stone of Rome above ground and imagine another stone below, close, airless, swallowing voices. There is less theatre there than in the arena, but perhaps more truth about Roman power. A body condemned to mine labour is a body the state has decided not to kill quickly because it can still be consumed slowly. No crowd is needed, no applause, no gasp, no symbolic animal companion. Just duration, just extraction, just the conversion of life into usefulness until usefulness ends. That kind of punishment is easy to overlook in favour of the more spectacular varieties, but it may be more revealing than any of them. Rome did not always need dazzling cruelty. Sometimes ordinary exploitation, legalized and prolonged, was enough. This is also where confiscation and financial punishment begin to feel related rather than separate. The Roman state was practiced at seeing a person in terms of what could be removed from them. Labour, property, reputation, belonging, burial, memory. All of these could be treated as detachable components. Wealth in particular was vulnerable because it was so closely tied to standing. To strip a Roman household of property was to damage not merely comfort, but continuity. The household gods remained, perhaps, but the silver was gone. The client stopped coming, the estate passed to another name, the account books told a story of subtraction that future generations would inherit as fact. Confiscation could also be beautiful in its coldness. Soldiers and clerks move through a villa at dawn, doors open. Objects are listed, valuable pieces are separated from lesser ones. Land is measured not sentimentally, but administratively. The family watches its own world translated into categories the state can absorb. There is very little noise. That quiet is what makes the process frightening. Violence without rage often feels more permanent. Infamy extends this quiet violence into the social body. It is one thing to lose money. It is another to lose the right to appear as a full participant in Roman life. Infamia announces that your future interactions will be structurally less valuable. Your word counts differently. Your credibility has become porous. You may continue living, but a portion of your public self has been removed and redistributed into law. The Romans were particularly adept at making identity legible through legal status, and infamy is one of the clearest proofs. It is social shame, sharpened into official consequence. The sacred punishments, by contrast, emerge from a different terror, the fear that wrongdoing can stain the city beyond what ordinary courts are equipped to handle. The Vestal, condemned for breaking her vow, stands at the intersection of law, religion, purity, and symbolic contradiction. She is too sacred to kill plainly, and too dangerous, once polluted, to leave alive within the city. The result is a punishment that looks almost like the state trying to trick the gods with procedure. A chamber, a descent, a lamp, a little food, an argument made in ritual form that Rome is not shedding sacred blood, only withdrawing support from it. This is one of those moments when Roman culture reveals how practical and superstitious it could be at the same time. The arrangement is absurd if looked at coldly, yet perfectly intelligible within a society that believes pollution can spread from a broken vow into the fate of the whole civic order. The buried Vestal is frightening, not only because of the cruelty of the sentence, but because the sentence exposes a city terrified of invisible corruption. Rome could manage open violence. It was less comfortable with defilement. The army feared a similar kind of contamination under another name. Cowardice, mutiny, lost discipline, these were treated as if they could infect a unit. Decimation, therefore, belongs to a larger Roman habit of diagnosing social breakdown as something to be cut out dramatically. What is so memorable about decimation is not simply that 1 in 10 dies, but that the 9 who remain must participate. Fear is pushed laterally, guilt is distributed, survival itself becomes compromising. Rome did not merely punish military failure, it turned soldiers into witnesses and agents of each other's correction. Even lesser military punishments reflect this same philosophy. The centurion staff, public flogging, degraded rations, humiliating duties, exclusion from the camp, all of these rely on one principle. Discipline must be felt materially. It is not enough to know the rule, the body must learn it, the meal must learn it, sleep must learn it, prestige must learn it. Roman military greatness is often described in terms of roads, formations, and engineering, but beneath all that lies a constant pressure of disciplinary intimacy. The legion is held together not only by loyalty and training, but by a continuous awareness of what disobedience costs. Fire returns us to a more public language of purification and terror. Some punishments burn because the crime itself is imagined as contaminating, incendiary, or otherwise too dangerous to leave in recognizable form. An arsonist consumed by flame satisfies a dark appetite for symmetry. A dissident or heretic burned alive satisfies an equally dark desire to transform invisible threat into visible destruction. Rome had always understood that flames fascinate. To use them in punishment is to place the condemned person inside one of the most primal spectacles available to human fear. And yet fire, for all its violence, moves quickly into stillness. Once the roar is gone, once the body is no longer a body, but ash and smoke, the scene becomes peculiarly quiet. That transition from heat to grey residue feels almost philosophical. It suggests why the Romans were so interested in punishment that outlasted the body. Memory begins exactly where flame ends. Damnatio memoriae may be the most intellectually Roman of all the punishments we have considered, because it assumes that public existence can be edited. A statue can be removed, a head can be recute, a name can be chiselled from stone, a coin can be melted or defaced, a portrait can be replaced. Officially, the person has become absent, but the absence is active. It draws attention, it invites explanation. Rome, in trying to unremember, often created a stronger curiosity than memory alone would have done. There is something almost tender in the futility of that effort. The empire that could move legions and build aqueducts still could not fully command forgetting. It could scar the surfaces of public life, yes, and redirect official memory, yes, but the very act of erasure left traces. Blank space is a kind of testimony. A damaged inscription still says that someone once stood there prominently enough to require removal. In that sense, damnatio memoria is both a punishment and an accidental memorial to the impossibility of total control. Posthumous punishments extend that impossibility into the treatment of bodies after death. Corpses dragged through streets, denied burial, thrown into rivers, tried in absentia, stripped of dignities even after life has ended, all these reflect a Roman unwillingness to grant the grave automatic peace. For the Romans, social order did not stop cleanly at the border of death. The dead remained entangled in family honour, religious duty, and public meaning. Therefore, the dead could still be managed, still be shamed, still be used. The Tarpeian rock condenses this logic into geography. A high place associated with the city's sacred and political core becomes the stage for a final rejection. To be thrown from it is to become a falling argument. The body says, in its descent, that the city has expelled what it can no longer allow near its centre. It is an extraordinarily visual punishment, almost too perfect in its symbolism. Rome liked that sort of thing. A sentence should make sense at a glance. By this point in the night, though, it becomes difficult not to notice how much Roman punishment depended upon spectatorship in one form or another. Crowds in the forum, travellers on the road, audiences in the arena, soldiers in formation, families at the margins of exile, citizens reading altered inscriptions, neighbours whispering about poison. Even the quieter punishments depend on imagined witnesses. Reputation only matters because others hold it. Memory only matters because others repeat it. Rome punished through community because community was where Roman identity lived. This helps explain the trials for poisoning and sorcery, which in some ways are the most anxious of all. They arise where visibility fails. If a man dies unexpectedly at table, where does blame go? If illness enters a house and seems to cling, where does fear settle? If a rival prospers too suddenly, if a woman knows too much about herbs, if a cursed tablet is found folded into the earth, the city becomes unsure which surface to trust. This uncertainty invites punishment, because punishment promises to restore a visible explanation. Once someone is accused, tried, and condemned, invisible threat becomes once again a public event. That conversion from hidden danger into visible sentence is one of Rome's deepest reflexes. It is also what makes these late-night fears feel softer and stranger than the arena scenes. Poison and sorcery belong to whispers, to household interiors, to the imagination's tendency to look for intention inside misfortune. They remind you that Rome was not only a city of law and logistics, but a city of unease. Beneath the magistrates and monuments ran all the ordinary human suspicions that haunt any crowded world. And so, when we gather all of these punishments together, the pattern becomes wider than cruelty alone. Rome used punishment to answer several fears at once. Fear of disorder in the family, fear of rebellion, fear of sacred contamination, fear of hidden enemies, fear of social climbing without permission, fear of military collapse, fear of memory uncontrolled, fear of the dead dishonoured or unquiet, fear of bodily disorder, fear of invisible poison moving through the home. Punishment, in this sense, was one of Rome's ways of making fear concrete enough to manage. That is why the punishments feel so varied while still belonging to one system. Each one teaches a different lesson, but the city wants the same result: obedience through imagination. Once you have seen what happens to the traitor, the poisoner, the false witness, the impure priestess, the mutinous soldier, the parricide, the slave in chains, the disgraced senator whose name is cut from stone, you no longer need every example present at once. The possibility of them lives on, in thought. Perhaps that is the final Roman achievement in punishment. Not the sentence itself, but the residue. The city teaches fear so thoroughly that fear continues without performance. And once you recognize that the whole penal world of Rome begins to seem less like a collection of horrors and more like a shadow system running alongside the visible city. Roads, baths, temples, forums, markets, courts, arenas, barracks, villas, riverbanks, all are touched by it. Punishment is not hidden in the basement of Roman life. It is braided into the open. If you continue walking, the city begins to arrange these punishments not as isolated scenes, but as districts of understanding. Near the forum, punishment belongs to speech, declaration, rank and exposure. Names are spoken there, fines are assessed there, shame is distributed there. What matters in that part of the city is visibility, credibility and hierarchy. The offender is shown in relation to the public body. Near the roads and the gates, punishment belongs to movement and warning. A cross placed by a road teaches not by intimacy, but by recurrence. Anyone may pass, anyone may see. The city extends itself outward through fear, as if the boundary between Rome and the rest of the world should be lined with examples. Near the river, punishment takes on another tone. Water is useful for Rome, sacred in some contexts, practical in many others, and ideal for disposal because it carries things away without asking questions. A body in water is no longer stably in the city's possession. It is surrendered, erased, or denied return. The sack by the river therefore belongs to a Roman desire to let nature itself assist in moral exclusion. The current becomes a collaborator. Near the arena, punishment becomes organized appetite. There are gates, handlers, seating, sequence, timing, cleanup, expectation. Every element tells you that terror can be scheduled. That is perhaps one of the most Roman realizations a person can have. The city did not merely create punishments, it operationalized them. It found ways to make them repeatable, legible, and efficient inside the machinery of public life. In temples and sacred precincts, the tone shifts again. Here, punishment is bound to purity, omen, divine displeasure, and ritual caution. A vestal condemned does not simply offend society, she threatens the relation between society and the gods. Therefore, the punishment must feel different. The city moves more slowly. Speech lowers, ritual fills the place where brute force might otherwise stand too nakedly exposed. Rome, which could be boldly physical in other settings, becomes curiously evasive when sacred status is involved. The law still acts, but it acts behind a veil of piety. In military camps, punishment sounds different from all of these. Boots, barked commands, collective stillness, the hard economy of ration and rank. The camp is a world where fear must coexist with operational efficiency. A legion cannot be permanently theatrical. It must march the next day, so military punishments are calibrated not only for terror, but for retention. They must preserve the unit even as they cut into it. This is why decimation is so astonishing. It is not merely savage. It is organizational. The same can be said of flogging, reductions in ration, public demotions, exclusion from camp, all the lesser punishments that reinforce hierarchy while keeping the machine intact. Within households, the fear of poisoning and sorcery reveals another Roman layer. Public power may be visible, but private danger enters through food, medicine, beds, servants, marriage ties, inheritances, and women's spaces. Rome feared what could not be openly met in the forum. Thus the home, which ought to be a sanctuary of order under the paterfamilias, becomes another site where punishment might be summoned to restore certainty. Poison laws, prosecutions for harmful magic, suspicion attached to hidden knowledge, all these suggest a city that never fully trusted the private sphere. Seen this way, punishment in Rome maps onto almost every environment the Romans inhabited. The city was not dotted merely with buildings. It was saturated with possible consequences. If you knew how to read those possibilities, every place acquired a moral pressure. The cliff might be for traitors, the road might hold a cross, the forum might hold your shame, the river might receive what the city rejected, the temple might hide an accusation of impurity, the camp might draw lots, the home might turn suspicious. A city like this trains the imagination continuously. This is one reason Roman punishments remain so vivid even in fragmentary sources. They were spatially memorable. Human memory loves place. It is easier to remember a law when it belongs to a square. A gate, a stair, a rock, a road, a chamber, a riverbank. Rome instinctively understood this and kept attaching punishment to the built environment. Architecture became a moral memory palace. There is also the matter of class, which cannot be separated from any of this for long. Rome was not merely harsh, it was selective in how harshness appeared. Citizens and non-citizens, elites and humilias, magistrates and slaves, soldiers and civilians, men and women, all moved through a system that did not pretend equal bodies deserved equal endings. One of the unsettling truths of Roman justice is that it made hierarchy feel natural by embedding it in punishment. Who was scourged, who was beheaded, who was burned, who was sent to the arena, who was exiled, who was fined, who lost rank, who lost memory. All this told the city continuously how it valued different people. That lesson may have been even more important than deterrence itself. The crowd did not only learn to fear punishment, it learned to read status through punishment. It learned which bodies were considered available for public pain and which still retained some claim to private dignity. It learned that power was not only above the law, but articulated through the law's uneven handling of persons. This made the system feel morally intuitive to those inside it, even where it now appears grotesquely unequal to us. And because the system was unequal, it was also adaptable. The same offence could produce different legal trajectories, depending on who committed it, against whom, and under what political weather. Roman law, for all its admiration of written clarity, remained a human instrument in a world of patrons. Factions, fears, emperors, local conditions, and practical calculations. That flexibility made it effective, but it also made it capable of opportunism. A charge of treason could become a weapon. A charge of poisoning could become a social purge. Confiscation could masquerade as morality while refilling an empty treasury. Public order and political advantage were never as separate as official speeches pretended. This too belongs to the sleepier understanding of history. But systems are rarely only what they say they are. Rome's punishments were tools of justice, yes, but also tools of administration, tools of theatre, tools of revenue, tools of hierarchy, tools of revenue, tools of hierarchy, tools of religion, tools of storytelling. That multiplicity is what makes them both repellent and strangely intelligible. Once we stop expecting one pure motive, the whole penal landscape begins to resemble the city itself, crowded, layered, contradictory, and relentlessly practical. You can feel that practicality most clearly in the way Rome combined symbolism with convenience. The sack is rich in symbolism, but it also removes the condemned efficiently from burial and memory. Crucifixion is theologically and politically charged, but also cheap, reproducible, and highly visible. Damnation to beasts satisfies appetite for spectacle, while processing condemned bodies through a venue the city already maintains. Confiscation enriches the treasury, while ruining enemies. Exile quiets a problem without producing a martyr in the capital. Damnatio memoriae rewrites official surfaces in ways that support the next regime. Even sacred punishments, bizarre as they seem, solve political and religious discomforts at the same time. Rome had a gift for layered utility. The older I imagine this city becoming through the night, the more I notice another quality too: repetition. Punishment did not need to be extraordinary every day in order to shape the city every day. In fact, it worked best when people had learned the categories so well that they could do the rest in their imagination. A magistrate's rods pass, and everyone remembers flogging without witnessing it. A road outside the gate reminds travellers of crucifixion, even when no body hangs there today. The mention of a disgraced name conjures blank inscriptions. A rumour of mutiny conjures decimation. The sight of a closed temple precinct may remind someone of sacred transgression. One trial for poison can animate 100 private suspicions. This is how a penal culture becomes ambient. Its punishments linger as possibilities. Ambient fear is quieter than spectacle, but often more effective. That is perhaps why, even after all these examples, Rome does not feel to me like a city screaming. It feels like a city listening to itself carefully, listening for disorder, listening for dissent, listening for impurity, listening for danger, hidden in households or barracks, or rumours or ambition. Punishment is the answer, but fear is the listening that comes first. As the night deepens, it becomes easier to imagine ordinary Romans carrying this system in subtle ways. A father warning a son that a reckless quarrel could turn into legal injury. A merchant checking his accounts more carefully because confiscation stories circulate. A senator measuring his speech in times of imperial volatility. A soldier sleeping lightly with the memory of discipline in his bones. A woman refusing food from a household she distrusts. A family keeping the portrait of a disgraced relative hidden rather than destroyed. A slave learning which punishments are only threats and which are not. A poet writing carefully around the edges of offence. A priest watching the sacred fire with more than ordinary attention. A child absorbing all this before understanding its full meaning. This is how punishment enters culture, not only through institutions, but through habits, and habits, unlike spectacles, are capable of lasting for generations. It is tempting, from our distance, to treat the more unusual Roman punishments as curiosities, grim oddities from a civilization that somehow mixed remarkable engineering with extraordinary cruelty. But if we do that too quickly, we miss what the Romans themselves likely saw. Not absurdity, but coherence. To them, these punishments did not always feel bizarre. They felt necessary, intelligible, proportionate within their own moral world, and above all, useful in preserving a city they understood as fragile despite its confidence. Empires are often most frightened when they appear most certain. Rome's punishments suggest a civilization deeply invested in its own permanence, and therefore intensely alert to anything that might corrode it. Family betrayal, military breakdown, religious impurity, hidden poison, public shame, social ambition without proper rank, the memory of bad rulers lingering too long. All of these threatened some seam in the Roman order. Punishment became the stitching. That metaphor of stitching feels right at this hour. Rome as cloth, thick with repairs, punishment as needlework, ugly and necessary from the tailor's perspective, maybe even beautiful in its clarity if one values order more than softness. But from the inside, For the people stitched through, it would have felt like pain. History allows us to see both at once, the design and the wound. The city around you is quieter now than it has been all evening. The last vendors are gathering what remains. Lamps burn in upper windows. Voices become smaller, more private. Somewhere a dog barks and then thinks better of it. On a far street, the wheels of a late cart cross stone with a hollow, lonely sound. The Forum no longer feels like a place of pronouncement. It feels like a basin collecting night. This is the right hour to notice how much of Roman punishment depended upon daylight, witnesses, and active civic space. Crosses need roads full of passers-by. The Forum's shame needs a crowd. The arena needs an audience. Even the cliff requires some public imagination below it. When darkness rises, the city does something punishment itself cannot entirely control. It equalizes appearances. It returns bodies to silhouettes. It dims surfaces. A magistrate becomes, at a distance, only another figure carrying light. A condemned place becomes only stone. The moral clarity Rome preferred begins to soften. That softening is our ally tonight. It means the examples can recede without losing meaning. We no longer need to stand before each punishment directly. We can let them become part of the city's outline. The sack belongs to the river. The cross belongs to the road. The beasts belong to the arena. Exile belongs to the road out. Shame belongs to the Forum. Slavery belongs to chains and labour. Confiscation belongs to the emptied house. Infamy belongs to the altered greeting. The vestal belongs to the sealed chamber. Decimation belongs to the campfire after the lots are drawn. Burning belongs to the smoke. Memory punishment belongs to stone and silence. Poison belongs to the cup no one fully trusts. When arranged this way, Rome's penal world stops feeling a single scream and starts feeling like a landscape of meanings. That landscape is dark, yes, but also strangely composed. Perhaps that is why it remains so compelling. It reveals not just Roman cruelty, but Roman system building. The empire built roads and punishments with the same instinct for visibility. It built laws and monuments with the same confidence that form could carry power. It built memories and erasures with the same belief that public surfaces mattered. And now, having walked through so much of it, you can let the system itself begin to blur. No more clerks with confiscation lists, no more magistrates with rods, no more soldiers at the edge of discipline, no more temple whispers about sacred defilement, no more crowd at the Forum enjoying someone else's shame, no more lions behind gates, no more names being chiselled from stone, no more rope, ash, chain or road dust, only the city, after all of them, cooling under night. That is the Rome you may leave with, not the Rome of any one punishment, but the Rome of a long shadow laid across ordinary life. A shadow made of fear, symbolism, and memory, but also a shadow that history has now dimmed enough for you to step out of it. There is one more gentle turn worth taking before we let the city go. If you stand far enough from Rome, and the years begin to stretch between you and it, a curious thing happens. The specific punishments fade first, but the habits of mind behind them remain strangely recognizable. The belief that law should be seen to act, the preference for making examples, the instinct to sort people by rank before sorting them by guilt. The temptation to use public disgrace as a shortcut to moral clarity. The hope that if memory can be managed, history itself can be disciplined. These habits are not Roman in an exclusive sense, they are human, but Rome sharpened them, organized them, and displayed them in forms dramatic enough to survive in cultural memory. That survival is why these punishments still feel so immediate when named. The sack, the cross, the beasts, the rock, damnation of memory. All of them carry not only their own content, but the prestige and weight of Rome itself. We remember them partly because Rome taught the world to remember itself so forcefully. A lesser city might have punished just as cruelly and vanished into obscurity. Rome punished with a flair for legibility. Its punishments came annotated in architecture, law, rhetoric, and imperial self-confidence. They arrived already packaged for memory. Even that, though, begins to soften at night. Think of the roads now, without bodies beside them. Think of the forum, without the day's litigants. Think of the barracks after the lamps have been lowered. Think of the temple precinct, with only the faintest tremor of sacred fire. Think of the river taking moonlight instead of the city's rejected. Think of the arena as a hollow stone bowl catching darkness. The city remains, but its instructions have quieted. This is the mercy of distance, and perhaps of sleep too. Human systems that once seemed absolute are reduced, little by little, to shapes inside history. We can still study them, still shudder at them, still learn from them, but we no longer have to submit to their atmosphere. Rome may have believed fear needed to be unforgettable, yet even unforgettable things change texture across time. They lose their power to command the body directly. They become thought instead, and thought, if held gently enough, does not have to disturb rest. So it is possible, even after a subject like this, to carry away something quieter than horror. One might carry away the realization that cities are never only their monuments. They are also their methods. They are how they reward, how they exclude, how they punish, how they remember, how they teach people to behave when no official is present. Rome's methods were often severe beyond anything we would willingly defend, but they were coherent, and coherence itself is historically revealing. It tells us how the Romans imagined order, what they feared losing, and what kinds of suffering they were willing to normalize if it meant preserving the pattern they loved. There is a sadness in that recognition, because so much intelligence is visible here beside so much cruelty. The same civilization that prized legal codification, engineering precision, administrative innovation, and civic permanence could also design punishments with chilling elegance. Light and shadow were not separate in Rome, they belonged to the same hand. Perhaps that is one reason the city remains so compelling. It never lets us keep our admiration pure. It places beauty and brutality side by side until each makes the other harder to ignore. But that moral complexity need not keep you awake. In fact, it can do the opposite if you let it settle the right way. Once history stops asking for a verdict and begins asking only for attention, the mind has less to fight with. We do not need to solve Rome tonight. We do not need to decide where cruelty ended and necessity began in every case. We do not need to count every injustice. We have looked long enough to see the pattern. That is enough. The pattern was this. Rome trusted punishment most when it could be publicly understood. Everything else follows from that. The city wanted examples, visible categories, memorable endings, controlled disgrace, legible hierarchy, punishments tied to place, punishments tied to story. A sentence should not vanish too quickly. It should enter imagination. It should travel farther than the condemned person could. It should continue teaching after the event itself is over. And now the teaching can stop. You have walked far enough among these stones. You have seen enough of the roads, the river, the arena, the temple, the forum, the cliff, the camp. The city has shown its darker grammar. There is no need to ask it for another example. Instead, let the spaces empty. Let the forum become only open stone beneath night. Let the river become only water, and a narrow shining path where moonlight lays itself down. Let the camp become only a line of quieter fires beyond the walls. Let the arena become only an oval of shadow. Let the magistrate become only a silhouette in some distant archway. Let the inscriptions, damaged or intact, recede into unreadable texture. Let the road stretch outward without warning anyone of anything. Let the old punishments remain old. History is kindest at the moment it returns things to their distance, and distance is what belongs to you now. One final thought settles over the city as the hour grows later. Punishment in Rome was never merely about the condemned. It was about the people who would wake tomorrow and remember what they had seen yesterday. The state trusted memory almost as much as force. A sentence once witnessed became a private warning carried home. A spectacle once discussed at supper became a family lesson. A road once lined with terror altered the imagination of every traveller thereafter. In that sense, Rome governed not only bodies, but anticipation. It taught people to foresee consequences before acting, and to feel the city's power even when no official stood nearby. That anticipatory life is difficult to measure in any archive, yet it may have been the most important part of all. Laws matter, buildings matter, records matter, but the lived success of a system often rests on invisible habits of expectation. Rome excelled at producing those habits. Its punishments were vivid enough to travel by story, simple enough to be repeated, and public enough to become common reference points. The city's shadow therefore extended beyond the actual reach of its officers. It settled into talk, caution, rumour, posture, and sleep. And now even that shadow is thinning, and now the stories can end their work for tonight. You may leave the forum, you may leave the cliff, the court, the camp, the temple, the arena. You may leave the river, where the water closed over what the city refused to keep. Let the magistrates fade with their rods. Let the crowds thin into harmless murmurs. Let the inscriptions blur back into stone. Let the animals vanish behind their gates. Let the condemned walk back into history where they belong. Beyond your room, beyond your present, beyond the reach of your own quiet night. Rome can keep its punishments. You do not have to carry them any farther. Let the marble darken. Let the dust settle. Let the last torchlight pull away down a corridor of columns and disappear. Let the roads empty. Let the city become only shape, then outline, then distance, then nothing more than a little pressure of memory, already softening. What remains now is not Rome, but your own room, your own quiet, your own unthreatened darkness. No forum, no lictor, no sentence. No crowd, no law waiting in the square, only the gentler order of the present, the slow rise and fall of breath, and the very ordinary blessing of being beyond the reach of that old Roman fear. So let the city close, let the arena darken, let the river keep moving without you, and let sleep, which asks for no spectacle at all, come quietly.